The younger schoolmate who secretly admired Raven was the one responsible for my paralysis from the waist down. He knelt beside my hospital bed, clasped my hand with remorse, and promised to care for me for the rest of my life. However, he later had an affair with that same junior schoolmate in our home. Hidden behind the door, I lacked even the strength to turn away. Just a year into our marriage, Raven's guilt had completely vanished. On a slope, he personally unlocked my wheelchair and pushed me toward the traffic. His only words were, "Daphne, I don't owe you anything." When I woke up, I found myself back in my junior year of college. At a foot bath shop, Raven was crouched before me with a toolbox in hand, saying humbly, "Madam, the water temperature has been adjusted." I stared blankly at the youthful and inexperienced Raven before me. He appeared nervous as I remained silent, pursing his lips with embarrassment and a mix of grievance and stubbornness in his expression. "Classmate Daphne, if you came here just to humiliate me, then congratulations. You've succeeded. Please don't disturb me while I'm working." The tension in the room was palpable. My best friend Jojo tried to speak up to diffuse it, but I grabbed her wrist. I then glanced at Raven's work badge. Technician number. Mupatayin daw. "Do you see your job as beneath you?" I asked casually, withdrawing my gaze. "Your work attitude is terrible. You don't serve customers sincerely at all. I want to change to a different technician." Raven's eyes fixed on me. He had always thought of me as humble and eager to please. The Daphne he knew would never have spoken so coldly. From my bed, I repeated icily, "Get out." Raven's knuckles turned white as he gripped the toolbox, his humiliation evident. Without a word, he turned and left. After everyone else had gone, Jojo leaned closer. "Have you been possessed?" "Before we came, you were feeling sorry for Raven, saying his hands were made for piano keys, not massaging people's feet. What changed?" Covering my face with my hands, I let out a tired sigh before looking up with a smile. "Raven isn't worth my attention anymore." Jojo smiled relieved. "Finally, it wasn't easy, but you've come to your senses." As we spoke, a sudden commotion erupted outside. "Let me in! Don't stop me!" Juno burst in, her eyes red, demanding, "Daphne, why did you insult Senior Raven? He's a proud man. How could he endure that?" Jojo frowned. "And who are you?" Turning her head, Juno replied, "You rich girls will never understand how hard it's been for Senior Raven and me. You live off your parents, but we support ourselves. There's no shame in that. Instead, you parasites should reflect on yourselves." Juno, that junior schoolmate who had a crush on Raven, spouted these defiant words. Raven admired Juno's unyielding spirit most, often comparing her to a flower emerging from rocky crevices, a stark contrast to me, the disabled one. Glancing at Juno's work uniform, I remembered how, upon learning that Raven worked at the footbath shop, she immediately quit her job at the milk tea shop and joined him the next day. Curling my lips, I declared, "Unfortunately, this shop belongs to the parasite you mentioned." "You're fired." Juno's face turned pale, then flushed. Panic flickered in her eyes. Just then, Raven hurried over. Upon seeing him, Juno's eyes reddened. "Senior, I only wanted to defend you. I didn't expect Senior Daphne to be angry." Raven stepped in front of Juno, frowning. "If you're upset, direct it at me. Don't take it out on others." I couldn't help but laugh. "During work hours, you're not working. Instead, you treat this place like your home." Turning to Raven, I added, "Come at you? You're nothing. Both of you, pack up and leave." I had chased Raven for 2 years, mesmerized by his piano talent. His slender, flexible hands could transform even the simplest music into something extraordinary. He played the piano, and I danced. We were seen as the perfect artistic duo. But in our junior year of college, Raven's family couldn't afford his education anymore. To stay in school, he accepted my pursuit. At the time, I was overjoyed, blind to the reluctance and humiliation in his eyes. I took care of all his expenses throughout college. When we graduated, it was only natural for us to get engaged. On our engagement day, however, Juno pushed me down the stairs, breaking my spine. At the hospital, Raven knelt beside my bed with teary eyes, saying, "Daphne, I'll marry you." But Juno is only 22 and might join a prestigious dance troupe. Can we let this go? Under the quilt, I pinched my numb legs, choking up. "But Raven, I'm a dancer too." Raven gripped my hand, his tears falling. "Daphne, please let her go." He knew how much joining that dance troupe meant to me. It had been my dream. But after being discharged, half paralyzed, I could never dance again. Raven visited me daily, apologizing and taking responsibility. "Daphne, I'll take care of you. Trust me," he said with teary eyes. I nodded and our wedding went on as planned. At first, Raven treated me well, but Everything changed when Juno reappeared in our lives. I reject what the commenter above said. Daphne has beauty, a great family, and remarkable talent. Raven is clearly just after her wealth. Even if she was blind to it before, it's fine as long as she's woken up now, one person wrote. Another user chimed in. I agree completely. Summer Evening Joe retorted, you all have too much free time. Focus on improving yourselves instead. Anyone with common sense can see that it's Senior Raven who looks down on Daphne. She only gave up because no one else wanted her. It's pathetic. Soon a heated debate erupted in the comments. Summer Evening Joe single-handedly argued with countless people, creating an amusing spectacle. I was scrolling through my phone, entertained, when a shadow suddenly loomed over me. Looking up, I saw Raven standing there, his face tense. We need to talk, he said. I gathered my belongings and turned to walk away. Who wanted to speak with him now? Just seeing him made me feel nauseated. Daphne! Raven shouted as he chased after me. When I quickened my pace, he stopped in his tracks and yelled, Don't make me angry, Daphne! You know what happens when you do! I froze. That line was exactly what Raven used to say after our marriage when he was unfaithful. Memories of him pulling my hair and hitting me flooded back, making me tremble. Slowly, I turned to face him. He stood a short distance away, his eyes carrying a familiar menace, one that didn't match his current restrained demeanor. He approached me step by step, stopping just in front of me. Like summoning a pet, he stretched out his hand confidently. Come here, he ordered. I stood frozen, staring at him. Raven's lips curved into a faint, self-assured smile. After a pause, I finally looked up, took a deep breath, and stepped back firmly. His face registered shock as I spat out a single phrase, Me, you. I turned and left without looking back. Behind me, I heard Raven grinding his teeth. You'll regret this, he threatened. Around the corner, I leaned against the wall, gasping for air as cold sweat coated my palms. While I appeared calm outwardly, my memories of his constant control left me instinctively fearful. I kept telling myself this was a fresh start. Raven was now just a student without any power, incapable of harming me. Still, unease lingered. This uneasiness lasted until I heard a familiar melody. In my previous life, this song became wildly popular, dominating every platform. The composer was an unknown pianist who spent 3 years living in a basement. The story behind the piece was deeply moving, but now the credit went to Raven. I silently cursed his shamelessness. The truth was, no one besides me knew how vile he truly was. According to the timeline of my past life, the original composer had only just begun conceptualizing the song and hadn't even started writing it. Even he would likely think Raven's version was a coincidence. As the song gained popularity, many sought to purchase its rights, making Raven the envy of the entire academy. This single piece pulled him out of financial hardship, sparing him the hunger and unpaid tuition he endured in his previous life. Though I despised his behavior, I had no proof to expose him and could only watch as he thrived. 2 weeks later, I saw Raven again. He was performing Wedding in a Dream under the street lamp outside the girls' dormitory, dressed in a suit and exuding arrogance. A crowd surrounded him, showering him with praise, while some girls were so excited they could barely breathe. After finishing the piece, Raven stood up, looked at the crowd, and declared with affection, Juno, will you be my girlfriend? Raven's gaze burned as he looked at Juno, and the crowd erupted in cheers. From my dormitory window, I watched as Juno, overwhelmed with emotion, nodded fervently, tears streaming down her face. I will, she said. The two embraced, and Raven, holding Juno, looked up at me through the window. Smirking, he raised his eyebrows triumphantly. I rolled my eyes and shut the curtains. Raven and Juno's relationship was filled with passion. They broke into the music room late at night, playing the piano and dancing until security chased them across campus. They violated school rules by taking commercial gigs, quickly becoming internet sensations and the envy of many. They even kissed and posed for photos on the iconic piano statue, a symbol of musicians' dedication. Juno's pale feet touched the piano keys, while Raven knelt to delicately paint her toenails. None of this had anything to do with me anymore. After being reborn, I valued every second. The ability to dance freely with my legs felt like a gift. I began preparing for the dance troupe's exam a year in advance. Practicing until my clothes were drenched with sweat left me feeling fulfilled and content. One day I overheard a teacher say, Raven and Juno, your actions have severely damaged the school's reputation. After much discussion, it's been decided you'll both receive formal warnings. Standing at the office door, I was momentarily stunned upon hearing their names. Gathering myself, I knocked and entered. The counselor's expression softened when he saw me. I handed over a document. "Here's the list you requested, sir," I said. The counselor glanced at the paper, then looked at Juno. "You're in the same major as Daphne. Her current skills are on par with those in professional dance troupes. Meanwhile, all you do is chase fleeting attention. You'd do well to learn from her. In our field, talent matters more than romance." Juno's forced smile barely hid the hatred in her eyes as she nodded. The counselor continued, "The school will handle your punishment." Before he could finish, Raven interrupted with a smile. Sir, please take a look at this first, before making any decisions." He handed the counselor a music score. As the counselor read, his surprise grew. Meanwhile, my frown deepened as I locked eyes with Raven, who showed no guilt, only pride. "Sir, you're a professional. You know the value of this piece?" Raven said smugly, holding Juno's hand. "I haven't released it yet. I can include the school's name in the credits. Surely you don't want to tarnish your star student's record over this." After a pause, the counselor placed the score on the desk. "You may leave for now. We'll discuss this further and notify you later." Raven nodded, thanked the teacher, and walked out with Juno. I quickly followed. "Raven, wait," I called out. Juno immediately stepped between us, glaring. "Daphne, have you no shame? He's mine now." Raven patted her head. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll handle this." He whispered something to her about a surprise involving the Shinger dance troupe, making her smile before she left. Once alone, I faced Raven. "You've stolen another composition, haven't you? You know this song was meant to save Professor Yutong's wife's life. How can you justify this?" Raven sneered. "Why shouldn't I? Yutong won't even write this piece for another 6 months, by which time his wife's condition will be terminal. What good will it do then? At least I'm using it for something meaningful." "He's your mentor," I said, stunned. "When I make enough money, I'll fund her surgery," Raven retorted. "I'm helping him." Disgusted, I replied, "You keep stealing. Eventually, people will see through you." Raven smirked. "By then, I'll retire as a genius, rich and admired. What's there to fear?" He stepped closer, his eyes filled with malice. "Daphne, you regret it now, don't you? I gave you a chance. After being given a second chance at life, the first thing I did was seek you out. But you wasted that opportunity. Now, I'm the talented one admired by everyone, and you're nothing more than a pitiful person who was discarded. I'll ensure both you and your foolish father face the consequences you deserve." I was confused. What does this have to do with my father? Disgust flickered in Raven's expression as he sneered. "Do you know why I returned a bit later than you? Because after your death, I spent a year on the run. And the reason for that? It was all thanks to that old man, your father. I could have naturally inherited all the Daphne family's shares as your husband. But who would have thought that your father had made preparations in advance? On the day your death was declared, his lawyer donated all the shares and handed over evidence to the police proving Juno pushed you down the stairs." Raven's voice grew increasingly animated. "When Juno was arrested, she panicked, ran into the street, and was hit by a truck, dying instantly. She was already 3 months pregnant then. Your father deserves to rot. He even prearranged an investigation into your death to have me thrown into prison. Because of him, I spent over a year hiding. That old man with a stroke should have stayed in the nursing home. Why did he have to meddle in my life?" I was momentarily stunned. My father had been hospitalized before my accident, yet he had known everything and planned for me even before his illness. My eyes grew misty. Daphne," Raven continued, his tone smug, "my return proves even fate believes I didn't deserve that ending. Your family owes me and Juno. You'll repay that debt little by little." I looked at Raven with reddened eyes and murmured, "Yes, it must be repaid. You took the Shinger Dance Troupe's entrance exam in your past life. Surely you remember the first place winner's choreography," Raven said casually. "Recreate it and teach it to Juno. She has to win first place." Clenching my fists, I replied with a sneer, "Fine." Raven, pleased with my compliance, grinned. "Daphne, no matter how many times we restart, you'll always fall for me. Don't worry, if you behave, I might even consider you." With that, he walked away triumphantly. I watched his back as my resolve hardened. The Shinger Dance Troupe's exam was 3 months away. Following Raven's orders, Juno came to the practice room daily, and I taught her with apparent sincerity. She looked at me mockingly. "The once proud Daphne is nothing special after all. The dance you worked so hard to create will be mine in the end," she taunted. It seemed Raven had told her the dance was my original creation. Let's see if you can even handle such a high-level dance, I retorted. Don't worry, I'll perform it better than you ever could, Juno replied confidently. I hoped she would maintain that arrogance on the day of the exam. While we prepared, Raven wasn't idle. He entered an obscure competition that unexpectedly drew the attention of international experts. The top participants from this small event later became prominent figures. Since Raven had already gained some fame, the competition gained recognition slightly earlier than in my previous life. Riding on plagiarized compositions, Raven easily secured the championship. A renowned master observing the event noticed him, though what surprised me was that on the day the rankings were announced, a much younger presenter handed Raven his award. During the live broadcast, Raven's barely perceptible frown revealed his dissatisfaction. Despite this, he maintained a composed demeanor in public, staring at the trophy with greedy eyes. His mercenary attitude clashed starkly with the calmness of the presenter. The presenter smiled politely. I've listened to your earlier works. They're excellent. May I ask you something? Still fixated on the trophy, Raven replied indifferently, Go ahead. The presenter didn't take offense at his rudeness and asked, Your compositions span a wide range of emotions. For instance, your first original piece conveyed hope and love, while your second was heavy with sorrow. Yet, there's only a half-month gap between them. What inspired such a drastic shift? Raven froze, panic briefly flashing across his face as reporters eagerly clicked their cameras. Several moments passed before he regained his composure. The creation is deeply personal, Raven said solemnly. Now, I won't discuss it publicly. The presenter's smile faltered, but he nodded understandingly. I apologize if I overstepped. As fame shields its subjects, Raven's behavior was excused as artistic eccentricity. Following the competition, he rose to prominence in the piano world, networking with elites and attending exclusive events. The master who should have mentored him after his win never appeared again. It seemed this was another butterfly effect of my rebirth. As Raven's influence grew, he began targeting my father's business, creating small disruptions that consumed all my father's time. Though I rarely saw him, Raven frequently called to remind me, This is just a warning. Teach Juno well, understand? Gripping my phone tightly, I replied, I understand. After I taught Juno the exam choreography, she stopped attending practice, only rehearsing it a few times before the event. When the exam day arrived, Juno showed up in an elegant costume with professional makeup, radiating confidence. The transparent evaluation allowed everyone to watch, and the process was recorded. The early participants performed well, leaving the judges satisfied. Standing behind me, Juno whispered smugly, Why are you even here? You're just embarrassing yourself. I smirked. I look forward to seeing you humiliate me. When my name was called, I ignored her remarks and stepped forward. As the music began, I immersed myself in the dance I had practiced tirelessly. Everything else faded away, leaving only me and the stage. When the final note played, I stood breathless in the silence before applause erupted. A nearby participant approached me afterward. Your performance was incredible. Even the judges couldn't stop nodding. You're sure to pass. Thank you, I replied without false modesty. No one understood better than I how much effort I had invested. Juno's turn came next. Despite her natural talent, her lack of dedication was evident. Her performance lacked brilliance, but was technically clean. The applause she received was more subdued, and a senior judge furrowed his brow as she passed him. Juno, however, remained oblivious, walking off the stage with her head held high. She deliberately bumped into me and flashed a smile. Sorry, senior, I stole your spotlight. I curled my lips and stared at her without responding. Feeling uneasy under my gaze, Juno huffed coldly and walked away. Shifting my attention to the judges, I noticed one teacher frowning while discussing something with his colleagues. Their gazes occasionally flicked toward Juno. Sensing that something was off, Juno, who had been so self-assured earlier, now nervously fidgeted with the hem of her skirt. After all the performances ended, we were supposed to leave, but the organizers detained everyone. Soon after, the venue was sealed, and members of the organizing committee arrived. Whispers filled the room as people speculated, many fearing the situation might involve them. I remained calm, but Juno was visibly restless. She quietly approached me, her voice trembling. Daphne, did you do something? I smiled faintly. Juno, a clear conscience fears no accusation. Why are you so nervous? Gritting her teeth, she shot back. If you ruin me, Raven won't let you off. I maintained a blank expression and ignored her accusations. The committee brought in computers and meticulously compared the footage from the assessment to other records. The room grew increasingly tense as several teachers glared at Juno with eyes full of fury. Juno tried to contact Raven, but her phone had been confiscated along with everyone else's, cutting her off from the outside world. Half an hour later, the committee made an announcement. Candidate Juno's exam results are invalid. Juno's face twisted in shock. Why? She demanded, her once flawless makeup now slightly smudged. Ignoring her protests, the committee continued. Not only are the results void, but candidate Juno is also barred from participating in any exams or competitions in any capacity for the next 5 years. Additionally, we've contacted the police regarding this matter. Candidate Juno is required to cooperate with the authorities and explain how she obtained the confidential dance choreography that had not yet been publicly released. The announcement caused an uproar among the candidates. Juno, panic-stricken and teary-eyed, stammered, "I didn't steal it. It wasn't me." She turned to me with desperation in her voice. "It's your fault. You taught me the dance. Arrest her instead." My eyes reddened, and I replied softly, "Juno, you must be so flustered that you're confused. This is the first time I've seen you perform this dance. Everyone knows we don't get along. If I had known such a beautiful routine, why would I give it to you?" "You knew," she screamed, pushing me to the ground in frustration. Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered, "Juno, even if you hate me, I'll take the blame. It's all my fault. Please calm down. You're scaring everyone." Juno lunged at me in a frenzy, but was restrained by security guards, while my classmates helped me up and offered words of comfort. I wiped my tears and cast a disdainful glance at her, causing her to scream in frustration. Hiding within the crowd, I watched her descent into madness. It mirrored the past. Juno had always played the victim, using her crocodile tears to manipulate people. Now her schemes were backfiring. Because Juno insisted I had leaked the choreography, the committee also investigated me. However, they found no evidence. Ironically, I had Raven to thank for this. To protect Juno while she practiced, he rented a private room and disabled all surveillance cameras, ensuring there was no proof I had taught her the routine. Raven's efforts to shield Juno ultimately worked in my favor. With no evidence linking me to the stolen choreography, and given Juno and Raven's notorious reputations for rule-breaking, it was easy to paint them as the culprits. Furthermore, the known animosity between us made it even more plausible that I was an innocent victim. The incident had serious consequences. Juno was expelled from school and faced criminal charges. "Daphne, you set me up!" Raven confronted me in the street, his bloodshot eyes betraying the toll Juno's predicament had taken on him. Smiling calmly, I replied, "How could I? I did exactly what you asked." "You were supposed to help her win first place. Is this your idea of help?" Raven snarled, his fury barely contained. I watched him with an amused expression. "Don't you enjoy things that are stolen? This time it's a bigger theft. Why aren't you satisfied?" "Daphne, you'll pay for this," he spat before storming off. As he left, I took out my phone and made a call. "You can proceed with the plan." From that day forward, Raven grew desperate, tirelessly networking at various social events. Finally, at an upscale party, he managed to charm a wealthy businesswoman. Known for her immense wealth and influence, she introduced him to upper-class circles. Rumor had it that at these gatherings, while the elites mingled and drank, Raven would play the piano for them. Occasionally, a guest would ask to try the piano themselves, and Raven, ever obliging, would smile and let them. Believing he had built enough rapport with the businesswoman, Raven eventually asked her to help resolve Juno's situation. To his shock, she exploded in anger, berating him for his audacity in bringing up his little lover to her face. Pale and terrified, Raven scrambled to appease her. When I heard this, I couldn't help but laugh. How did I know? The businesswoman was my aunt. Girl, how long are you going to play this game?" my aunt asked, lounging on the sofa. "That man annoys me to no end. His scheming is written all over his face. It's tiresome." I lowered my gaze. Yes, Raven's intentions have always been transparent. In my past life, I was just too blind to see it. My aunt poked my forehead playfully. "Hang in there for a little longer." Unbeknownst to my father, I had been working with my aunt. My parents' love story had been tumultuous. My father, a man of humble means, had married my mother against my grandfather's wishes. Outraged, my grandfather had severed ties with her. Only after my mother fell ill and gave birth to me did she reconcile with her family. Unfortunately, she passed away shortly afterward. In my past life, Raven had no idea about my grandfather's side of the family. When Raven mentioned my father's meticulous planning before his death, I suspected he had sought help from my grandfather. Being bedridden at the time, my father couldn't have orchestrated everything on his own. After my rebirth, I frequently visited my grandfather's house. Despite his gruff demeanor, He always prepared my favorite dishes and spent hours playing chess and drinking tea with me. My aunt, too, was deeply affectionate, often moved to tears whenever she saw me. Eventually, I confronted my father about it. Though reluctant, he didn't deny my suspicions. Raven, unable to make progress with my aunt, shifted his focus elsewhere. Within a month, he composed 10 pieces of music, which garnered widespread acclaim and earned him the title of Divine Music Harvester. When I read the news, I quietly cursed him for being a fool and made a call. It's time to act, I instructed. 3 days later, at the height of Raven's newfound fame, a person claiming to be the original creator of one of his pieces released a video. In it, the individual detailed the journey of composing the music, providing timestamps of handwritten drafts and electronic files. The evidence indisputably matched Raven's latest releases. But it didn't stop there. Over a dozen people followed suit, sharing similar claims. Raven was thrust into the spotlight, and the media swarmed to report on the growing scandal. In a desperate bid for damage control, Raven wept in front of the cameras. "I understand that being too exceptional can provoke jealousy," he said tearfully, "but I never imagined people would stoop this low. Every piece of music I create is like my child. If I had plagiarized, I'd turn myself in before anyone had to sue me." Public opinion was sharply divided. One of the original creators launched a pointed rebuttal. "Due to financial struggles, I've never replaced my old piano, and one of the notes in my composition is slightly off-key," they explained. Anyone with a trained ear would recognize the mistake immediately, and yet Raven's score contains the exact same flaw. Although Raven attempted to defend himself, his downfall was sealed with the appearance of a dignified man in glasses. The man, revealed to be a teacher named Yu Tong, appeared in a video with his cancer-stricken wife. Holding a sheet of music, he stated, "I wrote this piece 6 months ago, during a period of deep sorrow over my wife's illness. Because the emotions it carried were so heavy, I chose not to release it." Yutong then added, "There's a phrase in the second section of the score that uses my wife's nickname. If this work is truly yours, Raven, can you explain that?" The damning evidence left Raven speechless, and the public erupted in heated debate. An anonymous comment online gained traction. "The styles of Raven's compositions have changed too drastically. No composer can alter their approach so much in such a short period, let alone produce so many works. Unless, of course, Raven is a magical being like card captor Sakura." Initially buried in the comment section, the post gained visibility when a well-known figure in the piano community shared it. This individual turned out to be the same man who had questioned Raven during the competition, a foreign piano master and junior apprentice of a world-renowned musician. With this endorsement, the public's perspective shifted. Bloggers analyzed Raven's tracks and videos, exposing one fake after another. Ultimately, Raven's credibility was destroyed. Watching this unfold from behind my phone, I felt no surprise. When a text message arrived saying, "Boss, the job is done," I promptly sent the remaining payment. Yes, I had orchestrated everything. I reached out to the original composers, whose works Raven had stolen, confirming their suspicions. Many had spiraled into self-doubt, believing the similarities were coincidental at first. Over time, as their work continued to resemble Raven's releases, they began to despise themselves. Some even contemplated ending their lives. Meanwhile, Raven basked in fame and profited from their suffering. The most notable case was Yu Tong. While donating to his wife's treatment, I discovered the existence of his unpublished composition. Written at the onset of his wife's illness, the score was filled with anguish and hidden away on a dusty shelf. In his previous life, Yu Tong believed that not creating such a sorrowful piece might have prevented his wife's decline. But as the family's savings dwindled, he eventually released the work. None of this history was public knowledge, making Raven's theft of Yu Tong's music particularly heinous. Plagiarizing one's mentor is an unforgivable act in any industry. Combined with mounting public outrage, Raven's fall from grace was swift and absolute. The last time I saw Raven was at a nightclub owned by my grandfather. My aunt, who was about to gift me the property for my birthday, was interrupted by a commotion in a nearby room. A woman in disarray and a man clutching his injured hand stormed out. "Raven, how could you? That man could be my father!" the woman screamed. Juno followed, wielding a fruit knife. Her smeared makeup and despairing cries painted a tragic picture, while Raven, drenched in sweat, clutched his bleeding wrist. It seemed his ability to play the piano was forever lost. I signaled the manager to investigate. As it turned out, Juno had been imprisoned for a year, but reconnected with Raven upon her release. Raven introduced her to a wealthy associate, a man nearly 60 years old. Unable to accept this, Juno lashed out, injuring Raven. Taking a step back, I calmly said, Xiaowang, contact the police. This establishment operates legally, and such behavior tarnishes our reputation. It was then Raven realized I owned the club. Ignoring his injury, he lunged at me, but was swiftly restrained by security. Daphne, this is all your fault. You ruined me. You should have died in your last life, he bellowed. Smirking, I gripped his chin firmly, dislocating his jaw. Leaning in close, I whispered, Raven, I've never been kind. I repay every wrong done to me. Did you truly think you became famous on your own? Without the backing I arranged, you wouldn't have even stepped into the spotlight. I lifted you to the top just to watch you crumble. That's how I repay the pain you caused me. 1,000th of it, at least. You've walked every step of the path I laid for you, from glory to ruin. Raven stared at me in helpless rage as I signaled for him to be thrown out. Raven was right about one thing. Even fate couldn't tolerate his rebirth. With memories of 2 lifetimes, he would live out the rest of his days in regret. Not long after, the court ruled on his plagiarism case, issuing a severe sentence. It would ensure he had no future in music. Meanwhile, I successfully joined the Shinger dance troupe and, 2 years later, became their principal dancer, performing on global stages. Walking arm in arm with my family, I embraced a world free of deceit, basking in the warmth of the sun.